Welcome to Life Planning 101, brought to you by Kennedy Financial Services of Eastland. Tune in every Monday morning at 8:30 on KATX and again on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on KATX and KWBY as Angela Robinson joins Stace Gaddy to share important financial information to help you live life on purpose. Insurance, investments, estate and tax planning, and much more. All covered now on Life Planning 101.
Round, round, get around.
Little Beach Boys to get us started this morning. Angela Robinson. Oh, yeah. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing very, very well.
Good. We've got a great show lined up this morning. This kind of spawned, actually, if you remember a couple of shows ago, we were talking about, The Big Short and what actually happened in 2008. And we've had a lot of people just ask us, is that really true? Did that really happen? How did all that happen? So we're actually going to be sharing with you what happened September 16th of 2008, how we actually got there and what components we're going to be making up of that. We're also going to be talking about some things that you need to be looking about with your investments today to be able to avoid situations like that from impacting your future in a huge way. Because I do think that's a lot of people. We had the tech bust that happened in 2000. We had 2008 happen. And I know people personally that didn't work with us that came to us afterwards and said, hey, look, we got devastated here. We can't recoup this because it's not just down, it's lost. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And, today's topic is, we actually have a corresponding article. It's called, Are You in the Lifeboat with Your Investments? And reason why is most of us remember a familiar story on April 14th of 1912. Could you tell me what that is, Stace?
April 14th.
1912.
The Titanic.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. 11:40 p.m. and there was a lookout, Frederick Fleet, and he spotted an iceberg immediately ahead of the Titanic and alerted the bridge. What was sad about that is that great unsinkable ship was doomed at that time. There was 2,224 passengers and crew, and only 705 survived. Now, you might say, why are you telling us about this on the radio show?
It's Monday.
Yeah, but the thing is that we don't often think about our own demeanor. And here's a prime example of that. This great unsinkable ship that even its builder, if you remember, they didn't put enough lifeboats on the ship. Mm-hmm. And why didn't they do that? Because it wasn't eye appealing, right? And they said it's unsinkable. Mm-hmm. They can't sink anyway. And the builder kept saying, yes, it is sinkable, but the pride, the arrogance that was in the air led everybody to believe that it wasn't. In fact, the first officer ended up or the captain of the ship actually wanted to move ahead and get faster on the ship and keep going faster. And the thing is that if you look at that story and you look at some of the stories that we've experienced in our financial world, there's so many similarities to that. I have a hard time with this. My brother said one time, he said, we all have some element of greed and some element of fear. And I look at myself, I'm like, well, I'm not a greedy person. I have a hard time believing that, right? But in a sense, he is right. We all have greed to a certain level that maybe we want to take care of our families. Maybe we want to be able to live in a comfortable environment. We all have greed to whatever level it is. And we all have fear. There is no doubt about that one, right? That there are things that we fear.
To some extent, yes.
To some extent. And, the question is how do those make you react when things get ugly, when things get out of control, when things get emotional? What are those things, what does that actually do to you? What does that fear or that greed do to you in those situations? And I think that's really important for us to take a look at because, we look back at 2008 and here it was failures of the largest financial institutions, not only in the United States, but in the world. And it became a global crisis. And why was it a global crisis? It's because of greed. And then you think about people that lost money during that time. Yes, there were some that were true victims to that, and maybe it was out of ignorance. A lot of it was out of greed, but then there was also true victims out of the fact of fear. I mean, this is the first time in 2008 that we thought we were going to be entering the Great Depression again. And people got really fearful. They remembered what their grandparents told them or what their parents told them about when they were children and how things were growing up. And so, if they thought that this is all they had and being able to cash out and move to gold or whatever it was at that time, hide your money on your mattress was your only option, you would have lost thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds or millions of dollars, just doing those things that fear was driving those factors. So I think it's really important for us to kind of take a look at that because, here we are and it's 8 years later, almost 8 years later. This will be the 8th year. And how quickly we forget the painstaking events that occurred, right?
Yes.
Isn't that funny?
Arrogance bubbles right back up.
That's right. So when we come back, you don't want to miss it. We're going to be talking about what shook down 2008 and then what you need to be looking for in your investments today to make sure that you are protected.
Very good. I absolutely love this analogy with the black ice. It was a black iceberg, they called it, that sank the Titanic, and the arrogance could not be sunk. Same arrogance with the market.
That's correct.
Cannot fail.
That's right.
We're going to talk about that more when we come back with more Life Planning 101. Keep it right here. Welcome back in, folks, to Life Planning 101. This is our second segment. Today's topic, are you in the lifeboat with your investments? Here's our guest and expert, Angela Robinson.
Yes, thank you, Stace. And what a great topic we're talking about today. I just kind of get excited talking about this. And I know that's weird, but, I'm always I've got a phenomenon with the way the human mind tends to be, the behavior that we can have and don't even know that we're having. And the confidence that, the masses can rely on a government or an entity or a human being or a thought or even just an idea, right? And it's not always a true idea or a true thought. So we're going to get into this real quick. I do want to remind everybody, make sure, and we do have an article on this today. So if you want to see that, of course, we've got katxradio.com, kwbyradio.com. You can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, and you go to Kennedy-financial.com. That's Kennedy-financial.com. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our show on iTunes, Kennedy-financial.com/podcast. So let's get into it, though. What was 2008 all about? How did it actually happen? And, really there were two components. And interestingly enough, I had to go back to some schooling because I'm working on getting my certified public accounting designation. And so I did a master's presentation on what happened with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And, a lot of people say, well, a lot of this was just the credit default swaps, and I'll get into that. But that actually didn't start till 1997. Really, where everything started was with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. In fact, I was at the town hall meeting in Cisco last week, and they mentioned, the Congressman Conaway mentioned that there's really this fourth branch of government that's occurring now, and it's all these, oversight places or these own little entities like the Department of Labor, right?
Yeah.
Or Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were a perfect example of this. There was no oversight for them. Did you know that they didn't have to account to anybody on what they were doing?
Only because I read The Big Short.
Yeah, okay. So they didn't have to account to anybody for what they were doing at all. Nobody. Didn't have to look up to anybody. So they were, making all this subprime lending. And part of this, now you have to realize that this was actually put into law, started working during George Bush's term, and then it went in George W. Bush, and then it went into Clinton's term. And during Clinton's term, this is when this was put in place, was to allow loans to people that couldn't afford them. Basically, the goal is to get everybody in a house, right? No matter what it took. And so that's where Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac came about, was to get everybody in the United States owning their own home.
What's that they say about good intentions?
Yeah, right? That's exactly right. And we all know that some people want to work for what they get, some people don't want to work for what they get, and the people that don't want to work for what they get will never be able to own their own things because they can't keep up their bills. They can't make their commitments that they have, right? So, it, like you said, good intentions, but doesn't always mean a thing. And then it carried on, right? So George Bush, then after Clinton's term, let it go crazy, okay? So you have all this subprime lending that was occurring, all right? Now, then you have to ask yourself, in 1997, this is what the craziest part of all this is that the banks got greedy. They may say that they were doing these credit default swaps for insurance. And at first, that may have been true because credit default swaps, all it really is let's say that I lend a homeowner a loan. And I know it's a subprime loan. So I'm a little nervous that they're not going to repay their loan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find someone to insure me, and they're going to sell me a credit default swap. And what that's basically going to say is that if my lender that I loan to defaults, then they pay me the interest and the principal that I didn't get back from that person. Sounds great, but the question then becomes, now, and here's what you have to realize is there's a premium that was due. So there was a piece of that was I actually had to go back and repay, so it wasn't just a true insurance policy, okay? And then on the other end, that banker that sold me the credit default swap, guess what? There was no regulation over having enough money to insure those credit
defaults.
That's
everything.
Right. That's right. Okay, so here, and they said, well, why would you do it? The banker said, why would you do that? Why would you sell something that you have no money to back? Right, as a bank, greed.
Yeah.
Pure greed. Okay, there's nothing else behind it. Okay, so you can imagine what happened is everything just started to blow up. These banks just started to write off millions, billions, and then ultimately it was trillions, right?
That didn't really exist in the first place.
It didn't really exist.
Invisible.
That's exactly right. So, because of all this happening, these loans, and this is the same thing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac did, okay, is these loans that were already defaulted on, they wouldn't count them as defaulted until they needed to count them as defaulted for their accounting purposes. Think about that.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it was a really, really scary time. Now, supposedly that's all cleaned up. And just to kind of give you a fact, I think this is interesting. So these credit default swaps started in 1997. They were worth $62 trillion in 2008. Okay? So you wonder why our banks blew up, so to speak, right? You wonder why that actually could happen. $62 trillion is why they blew up.
Yeah.
That is a unsurmountable amount of money.
Nobody has that much money.
No, nobody has that much money, right? And, here's the sad thing about it is it really caused countries to begin to unravel, literally. Banks themselves. We saw great companies that had loans, real estate owners that had loans, and they were good loans. They had, 20% down. They did it the right way. And, their banks were going under. And there was no one to lend any money because no bank was going to lend you money by December 2008. It just wasn't happening. So if you were at risk of losing your loan, you were just out in the cold. And that is a really, really horrible thing. And I don't think anybody saw the catastrophe coming. But, here's the big deal is that, these banks knew exactly, Wall Street knew exactly what was happening. Everybody knew exactly what was happening. And, the thing is when does that time, that clock quit ticking, right?
Right.
And blow up? That's the biggest question. So I think if you look back on it, you wonder, we talk about the Titanic, we talk about being too unsinkable, right? And we've got this in our own government. It was unsinkable. It was impossible for the banks to fail. And guess what happened?
Bloop, bloop, bloop.
That's exactly right. So, here we are. They're two common pieces of history, but share so many commonalities. And so when we come back, we're going to talk about, moving forward, because we've talked so many weeks about not being able to stay in cash. And we're going to talk about that too, by the way. So you don't want to miss what you could actually be doing to get in a lifeboat with your investments.
Final segment of Life Planning 101 right after these messages. Welcome back, folks. Our third and final segment of Life Planning 101 this morning. I'm Stace Gaddy. It's a pleasure to be with you. Angela Robinson bringing us yet again, as is her custom, just fantastic information this morning. Good morning again.
Good morning again. And I want to remind everybody, like us on Facebook. You can follow us. We put some good stuff on there, facebook.com/Kennedy Financial. And we are talking about a great topic. We talked about the Titanic starting in 1912. We talked about a little bit about the tech bubble. And then we've really hit on, 2008, what actually happened. And going from here, the question is, where do you go, right? What do you do? And I think a lot of people are really confused by that because in one boat, we talk about inflation, eating away at your money. So, if you're sitting at cash and inflation is 4%, then that means you're actually losing 4% on your money every year. You have $100 in the bank, it's really worth only $96 next year.
I don't think that you can repeat that enough.
Yeah.
It just goes past us. We forget about inflation.
That's right. And so, because so many people feel like that's the safe way to go. Here's all this crazy stuff. And you mentioned to me in the break, Stacey, the economy is like a piece of paper. And really it just takes one little tear in it for something to blow up. And that is so true because there is so much regulation, there's so much government, and there is corruption. There is a lot of corruption. So,
yes.
How do you actually look at that? Because here's the deal. We hit an all-time high in the market last year. Does it feel like our economy is doing that great?
No,
it doesn't. Okay, now you got to remember, maybe some factors contribute to that. Now, one, the markets are usually forward thinking, so that may be a good sign by about 18 months, by the way. Number two, though, if you remember, the Fed pumped a ton of money into the market. So did that make the market go up? And then number three is people can't get interest rates anywhere. So they've been going to these large cap dividend payer stocks and increasing their risk just to get income on their money. Okay, so what happens when things get a little volatile? Well, we actually just saw this, didn't we? Mm-hmm. The last several months as things got real shaky, and then those people that are real shaky pull out that money. And so, how does that all play out for you? I don't know. I really wish I did what the future beholds, but I do know there is a lot more risk in the market today than there was on March 6th of 2009 when the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 6469.
I watched it all day long.
Yeah.
Tumble.
Isn't that crazy?
I thought it was a computer glitch.
Yep.
And it was not.
And it was not.
No.
Okay. And then it just shot up from thereafter. So, the problem that we face as advisors, I'll tell you this, the problem that we face as advisors is to be able to keep people emotionally intact and keep our investments, enough research out there that we can help you put together a plan that keeps up inflation but mitigates that risk. I think so many people look to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as a place of conservativeness, right? A place to put their money that it was safe. These were government entities. They
cannot fail.
Yeah, they thought these places were safe, and what were they? They weren't, okay?
Mm-mm.
So I want to share something with you. This is really cool. A PhD named Craig Arlson, he has what's called 712. He did a ton of research, and there was a period of time that he did a lot of research on. It was a 15-year period. You'll all remember it, 1999 to 2013. It was basically a period of time, 15 years, that the markets made nothing. And so, if an investor at that time was retiring in 1999 and needed to pull cash out of their account on a rate of 4% a year, he went through different scenarios on what would be left based on how they were invested. If they were 100% in cash, out of $250,000 that they started with, they'd only have $98,000 left. If they were 50% cash in bonds, they'd have $151,000 left. If they were in a traditional stock and bond portfolio of 60-40, they'd have $176,000 left. And get this, if they were in what's considered, and by the way, the 60-40 is considered like a moderately aggressive portfolio. If they were considered in what's called a very aggressive portfolio, 100% U.S. stocks, they would have had less in their account than they would have had if they were in cash.
Wow.
Think about that. And so you ask me, so you're telling us to invest because that's what keeps up with inflation. That's what we need to do. Well, how do you do it, right? Well, he did a study that if an investor stayed diversified. Now, diversification does not guarantee a loss, especially if you can't stay on the roller coaster, right? We've talked about that. You jump off the roller coaster, you're going to get hurt.
Going to have nerves of steel.
That's right. So you got to pick out. Are you going to be on the kiddie coaster? Are you going to be on the Texas Giant? Just stay on it. I don't care which one you're going to be on, but you got to stay on it. So, he took a portfolio among 12 different asset classes and equally divided it up over the same period of time. And that same, what was considered a moderately aggressive investor, someone that would be in a 60% stock and 40% bond portfolio, actually came out ahead, $438,000.
Wow.
Yeah, it grew over that period of time. Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think just going and hiding, of course, it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. We call that going broke safely. Also, going aggressive, getting aggressive, going with the flow. You hear something being talked about, you work off of fear or greed. It doesn't work either. Because if you work off of fear or greed, you're bound to fall victim to this ship is unsinkable, right? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are unsinkable, right? General Motors is unsinkable, right? Mm-hmm. Think about these things. Think about the things that we've experienced. Enron. It's unsinkable. It's going to go up forever. Remember that? It was never going to go down. So, I think it's really important, not only, doing your research and making sure that you know exactly what you're investing in, because you're right. If you don't know what you're investing in, it is a piece of paper. That's all it is. But if it's if it's something that cleans your teeth every day, or, puts eye drops in your eyes, or, puts your food in your microwave, those are things that we use day in and day out. And those are the things that you need to be researching of are these good investments, right? And then stay diversified. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't put a lot of your eggs in one basket.
One egg per basket.
One egg per basket is good, right? All right. So a couple months ago, we had a client that said, we're like watching paint dry. That's what we look like when we're investing. And I love that. I think that's a great compliment. I want to be like watching paint dry. We call ourselves T-ball investors. We don't try to hit home runs because we work with families that are in retirement, nearing retirement, and truly, we are risk managers. That's what we try to do, because I'd much rather be in a lifeboat that is floating along than be on a ship full steam ahead that's headed for that, what'd you call it, the black ice?
Black iceberg is what it was, because they couldn't see it.
That's right.
And they call it black, and we can't see the future.
That's exactly right. So, think about that today. Think about that. And if you've got questions, we've got some trivia here. Tell me, what was, first answer, by the way, life planning at Kennedy-financial.com. What was the Dow Jones Industrial Average's low on March 6th of 2009? First answer is going to get that nice little software piece that we're going to blow up your portfolio and see what happens if something crazy were to happen again. Isn't that great? And best question of the week this week. Make sure you send in your questions. We want them. We will address them. Best question is going to get a free large pizza from your choice of place with your choice of toppings. We hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Angela Robinson with Kennedy Financial Services here in the great town of Eastland, Texas. And hope everyone has a great week, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Angela Robinson, and everyone at Kennedy Financial Services. And folks, thank you for listening. Tune in again next time for more Life Planning 101.
Thank you for joining us for Life Planning 101, brought to you by Kennedy Financial Services of Eastland. Tune in every Monday morning at 8:30 on KATX, and again on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock on KATX and KWBY for more Life Planning 101.
Securities and investment advisory services offered through VSR Financial Services Incorporated, a registered investment advisor and member of FINRA SIPC. Kennedy Financial Services is not owned or controlled by VSR Financial Services Incorporated.